Grimsby in New York, and Barbara Walters in Washington.
Good evening. Two events last night and the aftermath today have dominated the news. New York City went totally dark last night, and tonight large parts of the city still are without power. And a U.S. Army helicopter strayed over the demilitarized zone between South and North Korea and was shot down by the North Koreans. 3 Americans were killed and a 4th wounded and captured. We'll tell you about that and about how the White House handled the potentially explosive incident later in this program. Today, the lights were coming on again in parts of New York City, and the citizens there are just beginning to calculate the tremendous cost in confidence and in dollars of last night's total blackout. We have several reports on that. First from New York, Roger Grimsby.
The clock stopped exactly 24 hours ago, along with just about everything else here in New York. The only lights were automobile lights, otherwise the Great White Way was pitch black. Broadway theaters and restaurants closed up while you could eat by candlelight. It was very difficult to cook by it. Thousands were stranded in the city when airlines, commuter trains, and subways were knocked out of service. Thousands of others, all ages, took to the streets just for the fun of it. After all, New York City gets blacked out only once every 12 years. And there were thousands of others who took to the streets to plunder and to pillage. Over 2,500 looters and vandals arrested during the first 8 hours of the blackout. Many more got away. The looters concentrated on small businesses, mostly in the poorer sections of the city, where unemployment and crime are chronically high. There were more than 40 serious fires. 2 firemen died. Some of the fires were deliberately set. Compounding the problem, false alarms, 1,100 of them. Mayor Beam summed it all up by calling it a night of terror. How did it all begin on one of the hottest, steamiest nights of the year in New York City? Well, to the north, towering thunderstorms jolted the rich suburb of Westchester County. Lightning knocked out transmission lines, setting off a cascading series of power station failures. And lights began flickering for 10 million residents in the metropolitan New York area. No lights, no refrigeration, no appliances, no air conditioning, no television, no elevators, and in some of the worst cases, no water. The city was closed down for the day. Things are now taking a turn for the better since it all began 24 hours ago. Don Farmer has details.
Right now, the power people tell us that they have restored service to at least 90% of the metropolitan area. But that still does leave several 100,000 New Yorkers sweating, many in the dark, many without water. But the good news is that things are getting better every hour. We are told just a few moments ago now that the power has gone out again in some portions of the city which had been restored to power earlier in the day. Part of Kennedy Airport is dark again, we're told, and at least 3 other neighborhoods in the borough of Queens are dark again. But the power company officials had predicted that that might happen, the surge of power causing more power outages as the lights begin to flicker back on. But we can tell you now that things are getting better every hour. Most of the trains and buses and planes are running. They're in business, if not always on schedule. Most of the radio and television stations and newspapers are operating again. The electric company now says its educated guess, its hope is that full power will be restored to the entire New York area by midnight tonight. The political leaders already are into some hot arguments over who's to blame for all of this, but the worst of the real crisis seems to be over now. Still, this has been a miserable day for millions of New Yorkers. The problem which began last night did not burn off with the sunrise, and many of those people who could sleep, many of them could not, but those who could awoke to discover that there was more hot... The problems which began last night did not burn off with the sunrise. Many of those people who could sleep awoke to more hot, muggy weather and more troubles. The power had not been restored to at least half the affected area. And the troubles were compounded by the troublemakers, the looters, the thieves. By mid-afternoon, more than 2,700 persons had been arrested, most of them for looting. 1 policeman had been shot. As many as 78 policemen have been injured so far. And the fires roared into the dawn. 650 separate fires in the city by late afternoon. 2 persons died in them. More than 40 firemen were injured. But the peaceful people tried to maintain a tenuous routine, doing something silly, but needing to do something as they waited, frustrated. Others lined up to buy food and drink, whatever wouldn't melt or mold or spoil. And others toasted their troubles with that widely favored, short but sure cure, strong drink. And those who hardly ever worry about anything didn't worry about this. The water was for using, for folks whose high-rise buildings need power to get water pressure in upper floors. But the children used it for playing. Satisfaction, not survival, was their concern.
Coping was demonstrated in a number of ways. We'll be talking about that. The harpist at the Met, when the lights went out, ad-libbed a solo rendition of Dancing in the Dark as the patrons filed out. There was a blind couple in one restaurant, quite amused at the difficulty everybody else was having. Taking advantage of another's disadvantage included sky-high prices for candles and matches, to say nothing of some cab drivers multiplying their meters. One of the sad commentaries was the fact that some people in stalled subways refused to leave the cars. The reason? They were afraid to walk on the darkened streets. The Bronx District Attorney canceled his news conference today. He was to have announced indictments on people charged with stealing power from Consolidated Edison. But just remember this. From now on, if you ask a New Yorker, where were you when the lights went out? Be prepared for the answer. Which time?
The heat, the pollution. You and your hair feel so bad. Come to a place where you can feel good again. Come to Clairol Herbal Essence Shampoo. The shampoo that gives you the spirit of wildflowers and herbs and the feeling of soft, sensuous, glowing hair. Clairol Herbal Essence Shampoo. For hair that makes you feel so good.
We feel the one. We've been together since way back when. And this year's gonna be a winner again. We are still the one with something new. Still the one that's gonna see you through. You're still having fun, and we're still the one.
Coping was easy for some people who live in the right part of New York City. ABC correspondent Jim Mitchell has this people story from the crisis.
Because of the problems in New York, and we have perhaps no better way of illustrating them than what's just happening in our program, we're unable to bring you the portions from New York, but we will return to that shortly. And now we will turn our attention to the other happening today that caused so much fear and distress. First, just to continue here, President Carter today ordered a fast investigation into the causes of the blackout. The chairman of the Federal Power Commission, Richard Dunham, ordered the commission staff to report its findings within 2 weeks. And that's fast as investigations of this kind go. Earlier today, I talked with Mr. Dunham. Mr. Dunham, people in New York were not warned of this. It happened suddenly. Yet the first instance was at 8:30. Couldn't Con Edison have called the television stations and said, put out an alert immediately, tell people to turn off their lights, tell them to be prepared?
Barbara, I don't know to what extent they did or didn't do that. Their first step was, it was not done. No. Okay, I just didn't know that. The first step was attempt of voltage reduction, and then that was not enough, and then it went on. I think they probably felt that they could meet the condition at that time, and then it cascaded.
Would you advise in the future, if something like this happened, that television stations and radio stations should be alerted so they could tell the public?
Yes, I think that's a very reasonable protective step that could be taken.
Do you think that Mr. Luce or Con Ed was in some way negligent?
Well, I can make no judgment on that. These are questions that I assume will be raised in the investigation. That isn't our primary focus. We're trying to find out exactly what happened.
You have
some
doubts?
Management, it may be a mechanical problem. There are no limitations to our investigation. The president said, find out what happened and what steps, and he did not limit that to any particular steps.
Is New York City more vulnerable than other cities throughout the country? It's happened twice to New York.
Yeah, I think it may very well be the case because one of the difficulty in New York City, the fact that all the lines are underground, they're more difficult to get at, they're more difficult to service. Certainly the enormity and the complexity of New York City is unique in this nation.
Could this happen elsewhere?
Yes, of course, these situations, I suppose there's no way to absolutely guarantee total assurance that they will never happen. The extent to which it is first an act of God, a lightning strike, which then cascades. There's no way to prevent, that I know of, a lightning strike on the really tens of thousands of miles of transmission lines we have throughout the country, throughout the nation. So this type of thing can occur. For instance, recently, a similar situation occurred just a month or two ago in Florida, where a tripped over and there was an outage in a whole section of Florida Power and Light. We had an investigation on that. The problem, of course, there weren't the masses involved in that situation as occurred in last night.
Could it happen again? Answer, yes. Where? Anywhere in the country. What can be done to prevent another such devastating blackout? Several things. For example, by burying overhead power transmission lines, you reduce their susceptibility to lightning strikes and weather. But once underground, transmission lines are more costly to operate and maintain. Failures from cable breaks become far more difficult to find. With cables, a blackout might last even longer. It isn't sufficient to set up task forces to find out what really happened and then make blue sky recommendations. That happened back in 1965. The automatic system, which was aimed at preventing a total blackout, failed last night. That system should have resulted in selective blackouts in order to save the entire metropolitan complex. As Con Ed Chairman Luce declared, any system operated by machines that are made and controlled by men can and will fail at some point. Murphy's Law. If anything can go wrong, it will. And it did.
What has shocked most New Yorkers and probably much of the nation is the looting that went on during the blackout. Especially bad during the dark, of course, but some brazenly continued it even in broad daylight. Hardest hit were the shop owners in the ghetto areas. In Brooklyn's Bedford-Stuyvesant area, police reported looters carrying sofas, rolls of carpets, television sets, anything they could lift. Women and children carrying goods from stores in plastic trash bags. Some shop owners attempted to guard their stores with shotguns, homemade spears, and clubs. In the South Bronx, a supermarket was burned out. 70 people were seen looting it. Harlem probably caught the worst of it. Block after block of small shops plundered and pillaged. One Brooklyn police officer said the looters swept through here like locusts. Over 2,500 looters and vandals have been arrested, about 80 police injured, and Mayor Beam demanded the guilty be punished to the full extent of the law. The looting and the violence are the biggest differences between this blackout and the one in 1965. As one angry detective put it, in 1965 you were dealing with human beings. Now we're dealing with animals. His quote. There's another big difference. This blackout hit only 10 million residents in New York City and neighboring Westchester County. The 1965 blackout hit 25 million people in the entire Northeast. We have black and white film of the 1965 blackout. The clocks had stopped at 5:28 on an afternoon in early November the last time. It was 12 years ago, the first time a blackout had ever happened. And to many people, it seemed something of a lark, even though it, too, lasted all night. The next morning, Police Commissioner Vincent Broderick congratulated the city on its conduct during the crisis.
If we learned anything from last night, we learned that the people of New York are responsible citizens and that this is a great city and that it's not a crime-ridden city.
Well, this time the blackout in New York has proven again that society's code of conduct is too often a very thin veneer, and that when imposed conduct restrictions are removed, the human animal is quick to revert to unacceptable behavior in order to satisfy his avarice or hate or both. Geraldo Rivera reports.
As you know by now, a terrible thing happened to parts of this city last night. When the lights went out, it began to devour itself. In an unprecedented explosion of violence and desperation and lawlessness, poor people who were ordinarily average citizens began turning on their own neighborhoods and consuming them. It was awful and it was uncivilized.
They came here, they've taken everything. She has nothing left at all. Everything's gone. Completely. This man is probably out of a job. There are two other men here who've been working here for many, many years. There's just nothing here. It's just gone. There have been people...
My whole store is a mess. Nothing on it. It's worth over $150,000. Now it's all gone. Now I have 12 people working here. Now they gotta go for unemployment. Myself, I gotta go send my family, the whole family, to the welfare department I don't want to even bother working or get a penny, you know. I just want to lay down in the bed, get my money from the welfare, and forget about work in the city.
They broke in here and took everything out through there.
How'd you get the money to get into business?
We worked hard for about 10 years to come up with the cash. Come up with the cash to open up the store and establish good credit and started bringing merchandise in.
It doesn't look like you got anything left.
No, nothing left. They took everything. Everything. And whatever, like I said, whatever they couldn't take, they broke. They destroyed.
Well, let me put it this way. How would you feel? How would you feel if you had a $15,000 or $20,000 loss that you can't recoup?
But on the streets right in front of the stores they had earlier trashed and looted, nobody was apologizing.
The system, so far, like the way things are with everybody on welfare, we ain't got no goddamn jobs and whatnot, right? The little bit that we got, for us, it was worth our while. Like, I feel like this. God closed out the lights for one night to let us have the opportunity to get back for all the times that we have been beat, for all the times that we have been oppressed, for all the months that we ain't got Pampers around this neighborhood for our kids behind. But we got Pampers now, baby. Now we got Pampers.
Tonight, thousands of tenement apartments like this one are filled with stolen merchandise and attempts at justification. Scotch, you got gin?
Yeah.
You got this Panasonic here?
Yeah.
This electric fan?
Yeah.
Chicken?
Yeah.
Pictures?
Yeah.
A stereo set? What's this? Where's this liquor store? Where'd this come from? Where'd this all come from?
I got that from a kid. He's coming down the block. I gave him $2 for it.
$2 for a case of vodka?
Yeah, last night. He's uptight. He don't care. There's no money out here.
More gin? What's this? And wine. All right.
I got some furniture from my house, as you can see me in my house.
Give me the couch and the chair?
You know, so I got me a couple of quilts and whatnot. I got marble top tables and a crib, you know. I wish I could have got a color TV.
Okay, I want to know why you did it. Why did you take this stuff?
Because number one, I'm uptight. I don't have a job. I don't have any kind of money. You know, and when the opportunity came, I felt it was something, man, that didn't just happen by fate. I felt that, you know, it was time for the people to get the money. I think God had a little something to do. The lightning bolt was something. I heard a lightning bolt flash hit and knocked out or whatever.
But I mean, what right do you have to take someone else's stuff, though? That's what I got to ask you.
They've been ripping us off for I don't know how long.
New York City has always been a city that at the same time was both very rich and very poor. Well, last night the very poor used the blackout as an excuse for an orgy of revenge and lawlessness. And one wonders whether this city will ever be the same again. From Burnside Avenue at 180th Street in the Bronx, I'm Geraldo Rivera, ABC News in New York.
Times of crisis tend to bring out either the best or worst of people, and in New York, as you see, it has been both. Another people's story, more pleasant. We try again for the report of ABC correspondent Jim Mitchell.
For 85-year-old Sonia Green, living without electricity has not been easy. But like most people in her East Side Manhattan neighborhood, she quickly learned to adjust. Mrs. Green's neighborhood is typical of those parts of New York which were without electricity the longest, a mix of high-rise tenements and small shops. The lack of an operating elevator was among the biggest problems faced by most residents here. Those living on the higher floors either had to stay isolated in their rooms or use the long and darkened flights of stairs, particularly difficult for the elderly. But for the small businessmen just around the corner on 3rd Avenue, the electrical stoppage was more serious. The neighborhood storekeeper did a big business in beer and soft drinks, but all his ice cream melted, and by mid-morning, his milk and other dairy products were on the verge of spoiling. But the hardest hit was a restaurant owner down the street. No electricity meant no refrigerators.
You have to understand, upstairs here, we have about 6 refrigerators, and all of that food is completely gone now. Chocolate mousse, lemon mousse, escargot, the seafood upstairs is gone. Things like that. We just had to dump it all out.
But despite all the hardship, the neighborhood was taking it all in stride. Water brigades were quickly set up between fire hydrants and apartment kitchens. 72-year-old Oscar Zaratsian thought nothing of frequent round trips to his room on the 24th floor, while other upper-floor residents found ways to beat those long flights of stairs. But everywhere, people were helping each other. Like Mandy Lazar, with flashlight in hand, she periodically checked on other tenants in her building. One group of neighbors even felt there should be power outages like this one more often.
Last night was really nice. You see everybody coming out and helping each other and directing traffic, and people that I never spoke to, we got together and started, talking,
Neighbors, you don't even know.
And that's what this city needs now and then, something like that. Once a year, at least we should do this once a year.
But for most New Yorkers, it was a holiday, a time to gather in the street or to sunbathe on the rooftops. But most of all, it was a time not to get upset, to make the most of a bad situation. Jim Mitchell, ABC News, New York.
This is a testimonial for Tickle, the antiperspirant with a big wide ball. It's so effective at helping stop perspiration, so effective at helping stop odor. It's given people a unique way of saying it works for them. How do we know? If Tickle wasn't working, who'd be laughing? Staying drier is nicer with a little tickle.
It's Julie Andrews as thoroughly modern Millie, a single girl living it up in the roaring 20s.
What is your opinion of brute force, Mr. Green?
Operator, you have obviously never been in a Chinese opium den.
With Mary Tyler Moore and Carol Channing.
Yes, baby.
It's a thoroughly delightful, thoroughly modern Millie.
It was suddenly a serious, possibly critical situation last night when a U.S. helicopter used primarily for hauling cargo, like this one, was shot down after it wandered into North Korean airspace last night. It was serious enough to pull President Carter away from a state dinner and for the White House to brief reporters through much of the night. 3 Americans were killed and a 4th wounded and captured. Sam Donaldson tells us how the White House handled this touchy situation.
There was a reflexive gearing up for the worst at the White House when word came that an American helicopter had been shot down. But almost immediately, the signs pointed away from a real crisis. The president learned in his initial briefing that the helicopter had been downed over North Korea. It was evident that the North Koreans hadn't crossed the demarcation line themselves. So the White House tried to strike in its first statement a tone that was both sober and conciliatory. Deeply concerned, said the statement, but any penetration of North Korean airspace would have been unintentional and regrettable, said the statement. By dawn, the president was convinced that the American crew had made a tragic error, and he said as much, telling a group of senators that he wanted the North Koreans to understand that we knew that the mistake was made by the crew. We're primarily interested in having this incident not escalate, said the president. There really didn't seem to be any purpose in acting tough. And there was a danger that such action would give the North Koreans an excuse to initiate incidents all up and down the line. So, by tonight, Mr. Carter can claim that by keeping cool, gathering the facts, and avoiding tough action or talk, the matter, although tragic, may not provoke even more and deeper tragedies in the days ahead.
Any shooting incident near the demilitarized zone between the 2 Koreas can be dangerous, critical, or minor, regrettable, but non-explosive. We forget that North Korea and the United Nations, speaking for South Korea, have been negotiating a peace for 24 years. In that time of sporadic talking, there have been more than 2,000 shooting incidents, and 5 U.S. planes have been shot down, counting last night's. Irv Chapman tells us about the importance and danger of such events.
There's been a long series of incidents across the truce zone, not always involving Americans or aircraft. Those captured were often held for long periods, so they and U.S. officials admitted criminal guilt or espionage. In 1963, 2 helicopter pilots were brought down. 1968, the intelligence ship Pueblo and its crew of 83. 1969, an EC-121 airplane shot down. Later, 3 helicopter crewmen captured. Last year, 2 U.S. military guards killed attempting to trim a tree. Every time it happens, there's a threat of phenomenal escalation. 2 of Asia's biggest armed forces face each other, men, tanks, and planes with a formidable armory of firepower and powerful allies to supply more. This is Irv Chapman, ABC News, Seoul.
Incidents of planes being shot down have occurred before in our history. But the point of the Korean happening is that a country can choose the way it wants to react to an incident. In a hostile atmosphere, the death of 3 American soldiers could provide the basis for the most intense and severe retaliation. But when it serves a nation's purpose, it can smooth out the affair. Call it an accident, a mistake, a lesson to remember. Roger?
Well, it's another hot and humid night tonight here in New York City. New York police are hoping for the best, but they're prepared for the worst. Governor Carey has sent in some state troopers to help keep control of the city. We can report that 90% of the power is now back on in New York, and that might discourage some of the looting. But nevertheless, all preparations have been taken. In addition to the looting and the vandalism, there have been fires, one fire after another. The total is now 650 fires in New York City. And as a result of that, there have been 2 deaths, none of them firemen, but 40 firemen have been injured as a result of those fires. A blackout crisis like this in a city like this produces a combination of lunacy and larceny, heroism and histrionics. It also underlines urban America's close to total dependency on technology. There were no elevators, no refrigeration, no trains, no gasoline pumps pumping, no water, no lights. The utility calls the lightning cause an act of God. However, if one day our conventional sources of power, including electricity, run out, that will be an act of man. I'm Roger Grimsby in New York. Good night.
Good evening. New York City returned to something like normal business today after suffering an electrical power failure that lasted in some areas for 27 hours. While federal, state, and city agencies began urgently investigating the cause of the blackout, New Yorkers are still counting the economic cost of the city from one day of lost business. But more painful is the task of surveying large areas of the city where the blackout brought an orgy of looting. More than 3,000 people were arrested Wednesday night and Thursday in the act of pillaging hundreds of large and small businesses in poorer areas of the city, Brooklyn, Harlem, and the South Bronx. In many cases, police were powerless to stop the looting because the crowds helping themselves were too large to control. Every kind of business suffered, from supermarkets to jewelry stores, leaving stretches of whole blocks devastated, windows smashed, steel security shutters torn down, some buildings set on fire. The Small Business Administration today declared the 5 boroughs of New York City and Westchester County a disaster area, making businesses eligible for special loans. Jim?
Robin, a New York police official described the looting rampage as the night of the animals. Others say it was more of a night of the oppressed, the have-nots of society releasing their anger on the haves. Well, tonight we examine why so many people in the ghettos of New York did what they did when the lights went out, and is it strictly a New York phenomenon, or one that potentially exists in all American cities? Robin?
One of the still uncounted victims of the looting was Syl Williamson, 43-year-old owner of a sporting goods store on Nostrand Avenue in Brooklyn. Mr. Williamson started his store 13 years ago with a $700 investment. Last year, he grossed over $200,000. In a few minutes on Wednesday night, he lost $100,000 worth of stock. Mr. Williamson, how did it happen, as far as you know?
How it happened, I don't know. The only thing I know as to what happened, the lights went out, and when I reached my store, people were in it.
How much later did you reach your store after the lights went out?
I reached my store approximately 25 minutes after the lights went out.
And were you able to stop or save anything?
I was able to stop the looting in my store only because of the rapport that I have with the community in general.
What did they take?
They took sneakers, basketballs, football shoes, everything of value that I had in the store.
What kind of neighborhood is it where your stop is?
I think the neighborhood is a good neighborhood. It's black people, middle class, poor, some middle class, some even wealthy.
And what kind of people did the looting, do you know?
I would say all types of people did the looting. I'd venture to say that no, you can't say what type of people did the looting because the person that you would say brother to you today, and you would never even think of him as looting, and you would see him carrying your stuff down the street.
People you knew?
People I knew.
How do you feel about that?
It's something that happened. It happened, and there's no, it just happened.
Are you insured for that kind of thing?
No, not for that kind of thing, no.
How much insurance were you able to carry?
I think my broker told me today that we carried $15,000 worth of insurance.
Is that all the insurance you can get in an area of New York like that?
In that area, that's what the broker told me that was all we could get.
What is the future of your business now?
The same as it was when I first started. I started with nothing, so I just go back and start again. The only thing I have now is more experience and more friends.
More friends?
Yeah.
Friends have come out since this happened?
Yes, there's been an outpouring of friends. Like most people only refer to the looters, but they don't think of the kids that didn't loot and the kids that stayed with me the rest of the night to help me to secure my store and keep other people out. And as soon as it got light enough that we could see, to try to pick up what was lost and sweep the garbage out into the street and try to pick and salvage what was, no one speaks about that. And yet those are friends.
How do you feel about it all now? How do you explain to yourself why it happened?
Well, I think all things happen for a reason, and the reason is not mine to question. It's just that I know what I have to go about and do.
Which is?
Just continue as, just start over and as though nothing happened.
And you will stay there and do that?
I have to stay there. It would be a loss to the community if I left.
Well,
I couldn't let what I've developed within the community in 13 years be wiped out in one night anyway.
Well, thank you. Among the thousands of people out in the darkened streets of Brooklyn on Wednesday night was this 18-year-old high school graduate. What were you doing when the blackout started?
At first I went to see my girlfriend, And then, I was going up on the elevator. I'm lucky I got up before, it blacked out. But when I did, I got upstairs, everything just went black, First thing that came to my mind, I wanted to go outside where everybody else was at. So that's when I went around to my neighborhood, St. Felix Street and Fulton Street. And then that's when, everybody decided to break into Mullins or Siemens or whatever place they can, to get some merchandise.
When you say everybody decided, how did it happen? How did they decide?
First thing that came to their mind is a way to make some money, they was going to do it. Any way they can make some money, they was going to try to do it.
And what was the atmosphere like? What was the mood like? Were they happy? Were they angry?
They was happy when the lights went out.
What did they say? What sort of things did they say?
Well, I'm not allowed to say it over the television, but, they said bad things, like curses and stuff like that.
Yeah. Well, you can say what you like. What did they say?
They said, oh shit, the lights is out, let's break in this place and get us some money. And the first thing they did was pop the lock on the door and everybody went in. People from different neighborhoods went in.
And about how many people were there?
I say at least 25, 30 people inside the place.
Yeah. Were you excited yourself? Scared?
I was scared.
You were scared?
Yeah, because, maybe I thought the cops would catch us, and then I have a record now for doing something I shouldn't have been doing. But, at the time, everybody thought it was all fun.
What did you do yourself?
I went inside. I got a couple of, tables and lamps.
And why did you do it?
Because everybody else was doing it. I want to be like everybody else. I thought I could make some money.
Mm-hmm. Were there cops around at the time?
At the time, the cops didn't come around for about 3 hours.
Were people taking basically what they needed or just anything they could get their hands on so that they could sell it?
Well, most of the people that was poor was taking stuff they can use in their homes, like, couches, beds, televisions, anything they can, to replace the other stuff they have in the house,
Yeah. And what did you do with the stuff you took yourself?
Oh, I kept it. And I sold some,
Mm-hmm. And how do you feel about it?
Now, I feel, why did I do it? I'd be saying to myself, why did I go out there and do that?
And why did you?
I wanted to do it, you know, go out there and be like everybody else. I thought the lights was off, I could make, you know, some money, have some fun, so I went out and did it.
What was describe again what the kind of feelings were in the crowd that you were in. You said some of the things they were saying, but what kind of a mood was it? Was it a holiday mood, or was it, some people have said it was a kind of mood like it was the one night off of the year or something?
It was like a holiday mood for everybody. For the poor people, you know, it was a holiday, you know, because, you know, they may not have enough money, you know, to buy these things, so they figure right now, while they got a chance, the lights was off, they was going to get it. And so they went out and they got what they wanted.
Were most of the people who did that people who do not have jobs or unemployed?
That's right. I have a lot of friends that was with me who was unemployed.
But you have a job yourself?
Yes, I have a job.
Okay, thank you. Jim?
Not all of the public officials out on the streets the other night were New York policemen or firemen. Another who was there was Congressman Herman Badillo, a Democrat who represents the South Bronx district of New York, one of the hardest hit with the looting. The congressman is also a candidate for mayor of New York in the upcoming Democratic primary. Congressman, Mr. Williamson just said that everything happens for a reason. What reason would you give for what happened in the South Bronx and other areas of the city?
I think the reason is that people feel that there's not opportunity for them in the cities. We do have two societies. There have been warnings about that for some time, and not enough people feel that the problems of the city are their problems, and that the city is their city. And when you have a disaster that strikes, some people separate themselves from it, and they tend to feel that they can take advantage of it. That's one of the very serious problems that we have in this country, not just in New York City.
Congressman, the young man just told us what went through his mind when the lights first went off. Let me ask you this. When the lights first went off, did you think to yourself, uh-oh, there's going to be looting, or there's going to be violence, or there's going to be trouble in South Bronx? Was that your immediate thought?
Well, I've been through these things before, and I did think of that. I've had many unfortunate experiences in the riots of 1967. I was in Attica, for example, and I've been in prison riots, so this is one other of the very unfortunate experiences that I thought was going to take place, and it did.
So it didn't surprise you at all?
No, because I know that there is that alienation. It's very clear. There's a lot of hostility and resentment, and unfortunately it grows because there are more people now in New York City who are poor than there were 10 years ago, for example. And there's more of a feeling of hopelessness, because even with a new administration in Washington, there is still no national urban policy, no program to provide jobs, such as the young man was talking about. Long after a new Congress has convened, we still find that the first priority is not for providing jobs for all.
Congressman, in your opinion, does this economic situation that exists for so many people in the ghettos, in your opinion, is that a justification for looting stores and setting them on fire and for what happened?
No, not at all. It's not a justification, no, not whatsoever. On the other hand, there is really no justification either for having the kind of unemployment that we have in this country and in this city, especially when you get a 40 to 50% rate among the young people 16 to 25. That's not justified either.
Congressman, you were out there, and you were out trying to stop people from looting and doing all of this. What did you say to young people that you would stop in the streets? And what did they say to you?
Situations I got involved in were crisis situations involving the police and the groups. The idea in these things is to try to keep things from escalating. I must say that New York City police are very professional, and we were able to diffuse a number of situations in the South Bronx which could have gotten worse. And I think if we had not had a very professional operation by the New York City Police Department, we probably would still be having difficulty in New York City.
But did you tell any young kid, hey, stop this, don't do this?
Yeah, I told them to move away, and we've agreed in a number of cases, for example, that I would disperse the crowd by walking with them for several blocks so that they followed me along, and then gradually some of them dispersed. I also got on the radio, and I asked the people to get their kids off the streets, to prevent them from forming a large crowd, because a large crowd attracts police, and that attracts more people, and that leads to confrontations.
All right. Congressman, thank you. Another view now from the well-known author and playwright James Baldwin. Mr. Mr. Baldwin grew up in Harlem and is the author of many well-known books, including Another Country and his most recent, If Beale Street Could Talk. His plays include Blues for Mr. Charlie. Mr. Baldwin, was it anger that the darkness brought out the other night?
Anger is too simple a word. Let me overstate my case a little bit.
All right.
It is significant to me that the looting occurred among the looted, if you see what I mean. At the level of, the economic level of the ghetto, and everybody knows this, is not only beneath that of the nation, which is one thing. It is also, one talks in this country about upward mobility. But a person trapped in the ghetto with no job and no future, and trapped in a consumer society which demands every day, every hour, every day that he lives, that he buy this and buy that. He is not living, for example, in South Africa. No, he is not living in a poor country. He is living in one of the richest, in the richest country in the world, and living on a level of poverty which in this country is utterly intolerable, you know, and has no justification whatever. Now, I grew up in that misery, and I do not want, you know, to see my brothers and my children in the streets carrying away television sets and breaking windows and turning into what society has always said they were. But I cannot offer them an alternative. I haven't got a job to give them. Now the society, which has promised us, after all, life and liberty for all, has betrayed that promise. And when that happens, you create, and the society creates every day, a group of people, endless groups of people who have nothing whatever to lose. And when that happens, you can't blame those people for taking what has been taken from them.
Does your idea, though, is it inconsistent with what the young man just said, that there was a holiday mood out there? Does that surprise you at all? That there was a good time?
It doesn't surprise me, no. Somebody called it Christmas in July. You see, if you live in a society which does not respect you, you have no reason to respect it. This is the root, not only in New York, as my friend just said, but all over the country. And the lights go out in Detroit tomorrow. You will have the same thing for the same reason. You have created these people. You have created this misery. And you don't know, no one in the society has even addressed himself to it.
Do you see it as basically a racial thing, or is it economic, or it crosses over many things?
The racial thing is an American myth. You know, you, if I may say so, have created, roughly speaking, the nigger. You know, it is you, the American people, who have put the Puerto Rican and the nigger in the streets. It is you who have assured them that they have no future. It is you, after all. I'm not my friend, that boy's age. I'm much older. But in the 50 years I've been on Earth, nothing on the level of the American promise has changed. I would go so far as to say that in the 52 years I've been on Earth, it has gotten worse. And the American people, if I may say so, and I must say so because I love my country, have become more and more cowardly, have created something they didn't know how to divest themselves of. They don't know how to let my people go.
Well, I would take from both what you have said and what you've said too, Congressman, that both of you feel that this is what happened is not a unique situation for New York, that if the lights went out in Cincinnati or Dallas or Los Angeles or Chicago, the same thing could happen?
There's no question about that. That's why when we had riots once before, we had them in many different parts of the country as well. And the conditions that existed in 1967, if anything, have worsened since that time.
But Congressman, in the blackout, it's been pointed out many times in all the many news stories these last many hours, that the blackout in 1965, there were only 100 people arrested, and there was not this widespread violence. What's happened since 1965?
Well, first of all, the blackout in 1965 was in November, a different time of the year altogether. You have to have lived in these tenement houses, as I have, to understand that even when the lights are on, people are outside in the streets at 2 o'clock in the morning. I've seen kids playing stickball in the streets at 2 in the morning and the parents watching them because the heat rises and you simply cannot sleep. When the lights go out, people are out by the hundreds without any lights, and you have very dangerous conditions under the best of circumstances. That did not happen the last time. Secondly, you have had a promise that has not been fulfilled since then, because we had many programs, and we speak of the capacity this country has for full employment. Nothing happens. We brought in tremendous amounts of money for poverty programs, and instead of using it to rebuild the cities, that money was given out to what I call politicians who use them for themselves. And so people see that there is money, but that it is not going on a priority basis to providing meaningful jobs. And that was something that was not available before, too.
Yes. I don't know whether you could see him. I think Mr. Williamson had a comment on, on your question to the Congressman.
The comment that I wanted to say, that in 1965, I would say that black people had a little more self-pride than they have been robbed of since 1965. They have been robbed of self-pride without even knowing it. We live in a society where a person is told that he should do this, that he cannot learn, or that he won't learn, so he's told he can't learn, so he believes it. But I know that they are very brilliant, and if he don't know why he looted. If he gave you some reasons, but he doesn't know why he looted. I say that the media caused him to loot. The media caused him to loot because the media tells him that you have no job, or there's no future for you. But it's not that they don't have jobs, or there are no jobs available. It's the job that a person feels as though he's told he has qualifications for, and they find out he doesn't have the qualifications for the job, and then he can't fill the job. He has been given no work jobs and only collect a pay, and that's not a job. That's not even self-motivating. That's self-destruction. To pay a person $37.50 a week for just showing up, signing a sheet, that's not a job. And that's what those summer programs have actually ended up to be. Those are not jobs.
That's what I meant about the waste of funds that have been made available.
Those things demoralize a person. They don't, it's not coming out saying, well, I don't want you to work, so here's $37.50, just sign the sheet. No, they do it better than that. They let him sign the sheet. Anything else that happens, like things that are allowed to happen in the black neighborhood, never happens in white neighborhoods. Not.
Yeah. Yes, go ahead, sir. Finish.
Not because the person they allow dice games to go on the street. That's not my way of life. That's not his way of life. But if you even ask someone, say, why don't you stop it? He'll tell you that's his way of life. I don't live like that. And I know Mr. Baldwin doesn't live like that. And I know countless of my friends and even my people that come in and shop with me don't live like that. But we only see 1 or 2% of the people that live that way, and they spotlight those 1 or 2%. They don't spotlight the other 98%.
Mr. Baldwin.
I just want to add to what my friend just said. Part of the American tragedy is that the American people have always created the nigger that they wanted to see. They're this is a very remarkable man. And the boy is very remarkable, too. And both of them are saying in another way that they're treated in the society with no respect whatever. Langston Hughes said, you treat colored people like second-class fools. Now, if you do that, there's a bill that comes in that you have to pay. You rob a man of his self-respect, he will do anything.
Okay. Robin?
Yeah, at risk of seeming very obtuse on this, let me put a question that perhaps a lot of people in our audience might put. It would seem since 1965, which was just when the first civil rights bill had been passed, and then the further civil rights bills, a lot of people, certainly politicians and white politicians in Washington, would argue there have been tremendous advances in opportunities and everything since then. What?
That is, if I may say so, I hate to say it, but that is a total lie. It is proof of American cowardice, even to say so. Look, in 1954, you passed, the Supreme Court outlawed segregation in the schools, right? I was in Little Rock in 1957 during one of the school battles. That's 20 years ago. I was in Boston a few months ago. Now, are you telling me that the American people have delivered on any promises at all? This boy wasn't even born then.
What's your opinion of that?
The unemployment rate is much higher today than it was in 1965, to take one simple example. There's much greater poverty in all of the cities of America, especially in the northern cities, than there was in 1965. And the programs that worked during all of those years, my files in Washington are full of successful programs that turn out to be valid, but yet we cannot get them implemented on a mass basis. I can get a sweat equity program to get a gang of kids to the Renegades to rehabilitate 3 buildings in the South Bronx, but when they are successful, I cannot get it done for 30,000 buildings throughout the city. So that there really is no commitment to even trying out the solutions that we have found work.
If this is a racial stroke economic problem, and this is an expression of massive frustration for the failure to do what you said has not been done over the last 15 years, why does Mr. Williamson get ripped off? What is he a symbol of to the people who ripped him off? Mr. Williamson?
I'm not a symbol. They don't see me. When I was not visible. When I became visible, the looting in my store stopped.
May I add to that?
Now,
yes.
Yeah.
Finish, Mr. Williamson.
I say, when I became visible, the looting in my store stopped. They only saw, like he said, they saw merchandise. And the merchandise that I had was very sellable on the street. And that was the total answer, because we have been programmed into believing that money is a cure-all. That's why I don't feel bitter about losing what I lost, because I still have more than I had when I started.
If the lights went out, let me ask the young man, if the lights went out again one hot night next month, would this happen all over again?
If it just come on, if it just go off just like that, maybe, most likely it will happen again. But if, you know, if they knew the lights was gonna go out, it wouldn't happen that much, because the young kids probably be scared that the people be waiting for them this time, you know. They be guarding their store, their property. You know.
Again, the fear ethic. In other words, see, we're programmed to respond to fear. We're programmed to respond to the gun, but we're not programmed to self-respect. See, when a person respects himself, he cannot go out and destroy his brother's property, because the people that he put out of work, he didn't hurt the store owner. Like all those stores that they destroyed in Bedford-Stuyvesant, the only people working in those stores were black people. Now, what they actually did was to put their friends' parents out of work. Some of their own friends they put out of work. The person that was able to employ 7, 8, 9, 10 people, he was also able probably to carry enough insurance to whether he want, if he wanted to rebuild, he could rebuild it in another neighborhood.
We just have a few seconds left. I just want to ask, if this is not to happen again, what, in your view, as the politician among us, needs to be done?
We need to have a commitment to bring about change in the areas that we know how to bring about change, so we can remove the poverty in this country. We know how to do it, and we know how to provide jobs.
We have to leave it there, I'm sorry. Thank you very much, Jim. Good night.
Good night, Robin.
And thank you all very much indeed. That's all for tonight. We'll be back on Monday night with a look at the crisis in the cost of car insurance. I'm Robert McNeil. Good night. Would you all stay?